How can a prior conviction make your life hell? This is Christina Williams with Just Criminal Law.
And David Mann, legal storytelling specialist. Well, that's an awfully strong statement. So it sounds like there must be many ways that a prior conviction can make your life hell. So what's a few of them?
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but a lot of times what we see in our office is somebody comes in, they have a new criminal charge, and, we always ask them, have you been in trouble before? Have you ever had to be in front of a judge before? And a lot of times we get an answer of, yes, I have a prior conviction, I should have fought it. I shouldn't have pled guilty. I should have taken it to trial, but I took a plea bargain. And, that is something that they're now worried about because they have a new criminal charge, which they've never planned on having. So yes, it is a big deal when you have a new criminal charge to have a prior conviction.
Okay, so first lesson, it sounds like, is don't plead guilty. Like, sometimes I suppose you have to, but in many cases you don't. But you're talking sort of about people who go, well, I'm going to make this go away. I'm just going to plead guilty. And then it ends up biting them later. So what happens then? Now they've got this prior conviction, they've got a second one, and what might happen?
Well, now they have a new charge. And so automatically the prosecutor and the court and the police, everybody is going to look at them differently because they have a prior conviction. And along with a conviction, the judge and the prosecutor are going to assume that the person was guilty of that prior conviction, or they wouldn't have pled guilty, which is not always the case. And, say they had a prior DUI and now all of a sudden they have another DUI. Maybe, we could have helped them get that prior DUI dismissed or reduced, but now they have a second pending DUI. And so in this sort of an example, they're facing mandatory jail time at this point, a long driver's license suspension, and all the consequences that would now come along with potentially having two DUIs. That is, they're going to have a harder time finding a job or keeping a job.
Okay, and so if this goes to trial, I'm just sort of imagining that the prosecution can begin to ask your client about all of this, and whether it ends up impacting the case or not, it still gets aired, it still gets heard by the jury. Is that right?
Well, in some sort of situations that will happen, not necessarily with a DUI going to trial, but say you have a client who's charged with stalking and they have a prior conviction of say, pushing the person that's now accusing them of stalking. And so they got convicted of a battery. And they really, were not stalking the client or the victim, but the victim reported it in a way that made them look bad. And, they just don't want to plead guilty. They aren't guilty. So we go to trial, and the prosecutor may be able to use that prior interaction between the two of them against our client if the court finds that it could be relevant. And it's a certain kind of evidence that can be brought before the jury, not for the purpose of saying, he's guilty of stalking, but just as a way of saying, hey, he's saying he didn't stalk her, but, he's been abusive in the past, and this is a course of conduct or a pattern. And so, in that situation, that prior conviction could come in to trial, and then the jury and the judge are going to look at my client in a completely different light than, if he didn't have that prior conviction. So that's an example, I think, of that.
Yeah, that's something that when I work with people in court on storytelling, that the jury is sort of sizing up who are the characters in this story. And you're describing a situation where they're adding a lot of layers to the character of that client and making certain assumptions. Maybe it seems like a criminal. Because of this information from the past. Is that about how it works?
That's exactly how it works. And, no matter how innocent you are of the new charge, and no matter how much the judge says, don't use this prior evidence to determine the guilt on the new charge, the jury just doesn't know how to keep those things separate, and they're definitely going to use it against my client.
Okay, so it sounds like there are many ways in which a prior conviction can come back to haunt you later. So if someone has one of these prior convictions and they're now facing a second, it sounds like it's a good idea to get a lawyer. How might they get in touch with you?
Sure, we'll include a link in the description where they can call, text, or chat with a member of my team anytime, day or night. Here at Just Criminal Law, we know you only get one shot at justice, so make yours count.